The folding chair scraped against the tile floor and toppled sideways with a hollow clang. Nobody moved to pick it up. My little brother was on his knees in the center of the wrestling room, both hands pressed flat against the blue mat, trying to remember how to breathe. His mouth was open, but nothing was coming out. Coach Ritter stood over him, 6'2", 230 pounds of Division I nostalgia, wrapped in a red and black team pullover. He looked down at Marcus the way you look at something you scraped off the bottom of your shoe. "Get up," Ritter said. Not quiet, not private. Loud enough for every single one of the 22 boys in that room to hear every syllable. "You eat one single leg, and you fall apart like a wet paper bag. You want to represent this program? You can't even keep your hips underneath you." Marcus pressed his palms harder into the mat and tried to push himself upright. His arms were shaking. His right ear was already turning a deep, swollen red where his head had been driven into the vinyl. He was 14 years old. I was standing in the doorway of the gym, still wearing my issued athletic shorts from the Fort Campbell morning PT session I had driven 3 hours straight from to get here. My name is Sergeant First Class Danielle Reyes. United States Army, combat arms. 2 deployments, one of them in places that don't get named in newspapers. And the man in the red pullover had just slammed my 14-year-old brother head first into the mat for the second time in 4 minutes. If you've ever watched someone you love get broken down slowly until they stop believing they deserve better, stay with me, because I'm about to show you exactly what it costs to mistake my family for something you can use up and throw away. I found out what was happening to Marcus the same way I found out about most things back home. A voicemail I wasn't supposed to hear until it was almost too late. It was a Tuesday night at Fort Campbell. I was sitting on the concrete steps outside the barracks, eating a protein bar that tasted like chalk and cardboard, cooling down after a 12-mile ruck with full kit. My phone had been face down in my cargo pocket all day. When I finally flipped it over, there were 3 missed calls, one from my Aunt Linda, one from a number I didn't recognize, and one from Marcus, except Marcus never called me, he texted. Always. He called exactly once before, when he was 9, and thought he'd broken his wrist falling out of the oak tree in the backyard. I played the voicemail from the unknown number first. It was a woman's voice, quiet, like she was worried someone nearby might hear her. She said her name was Mrs. Okafor. She said she was the mother of one of the wrestlers on the Hargrove Middle School team, and she was calling because she didn't know who else to call. She said Coach Ritter had been pulling Marcus aside after practice 3 times a week for what he called extra conditioning. She said the other boys were starting to avoid Marcus in the locker room. She said Marcus had stopped eating lunch at school. She said she was sorry for leaving this on a voicemail, but she didn't know what else to do. I sat on those concrete steps for about 11 seconds. Then I got up, walked inside, and called my unit commander to request emergency family leave before I had even fully processed what I was going to do when I got there. The drive back to Clarksville, Tennessee took 3 hours on a good night. I made it in 2 hours and 40 minutes. I didn't stop. I didn't eat. I drove with both hands on the wheel and the radio off, and I thought about the last time I saw Marcus in person. It was Thanksgiving. He had been quieter than I remembered. I thought it was just middle school. I thought it was just being 14. I thought a lot of things I shouldn't have thought. Our mom passed when Marcus was 7. She had a brain aneurysm during her morning shift at the diner, where she'd worked for 11 years. She was 34 years old. After that, Marcus and I went to live with our grandmother, Nana Ruth, in her 2-bedroom house on the east side of Clarksville. Nana Ruth was 68 years old and had rheumatoid arthritis in both hands, but she kept that house running on love and stubbornness and the grace of God. She signed every permission slip. She went to every school conference. She fed us hot food and made us do our homework at the kitchen table every night without exception. I joined the Army at 19 because I needed to be useful in a way that made sense to me, because I couldn't sit still in a town that felt like it was slowly hollowing itself out, because I wanted to do something with my hands and my body that actually mattered, and because I knew, with Nana Ruth getting older and her pension check barely covering the utilities, that my BAH and my enlistment bonus were going to be the difference between Marcus having a shot at something or not. Every month, I set aside $300 and put it in an account marked Marcus School. It was supposed to be for him, for cleats when his feet outgrew the last pair, for the travel tournament fees that the school didn't cover, for the winter coat he needed because the one he had was 2 sizes too small, and Nana Ruth couldn't always tell from looking at him that he was cold because he stopped telling people when things hurt. Marcus was the kind of kid who smiled through everything. He didn't complain. He didn't ask for help. He'd been doing it his whole life, absorbing the hard parts quietly and trying not to be a burden on anyone. When Ritter picked him out at tryouts, when Ritter told him he had natural instincts and real potential, and that the program was going to be a second family for him, Marcus believed every word of it. Of course he did. He was 14 years old and desperate to belong to something solid. He put in the hours. He was in the room by 5:45 in the morning before school started. He stayed late after practice. He went to the extra conditioning sessions Ritter called for the kids he said had upside. He told Nana Ruth things were going great. He sent me texts that said things like, "Finally hit a clean double," and "Ritter says I might start varsity." He sounded happy. He sounded like himself. But Mrs. Okafor had been watching, and she saw what I couldn't see from 300 miles away. Ritter didn't single Marcus out because he saw potential in him. He singled him out because Marcus was the easiest target in the room, no father in the picture. An elderly grandmother who wouldn't set foot in a wrestling room and wouldn't know what she was looking at if she did. A sister off at a military base in Kentucky. Ritter had been doing this for a long time. He knew exactly which kids came from situations where no one was coming to check. I pulled into the school parking lot at 6:14 in the evening. Practice was supposed to run until 6:30. I didn't go to the front office. I didn't stop at the main entrance. I walked straight around the side of the building to the gymnasium entrance on the east side, the one I knew the team used because Marcus had described it to me once in a text when he was excited about getting his own locker assignment. The door was propped open with a rubber door stopper. I could hear the squeaking of socks on vinyl flooring, the clap of bodies hitting the mat, the bark of Ritter's voice bouncing off cinder block walls. I stepped inside. And that is when I saw Marcus go down. Ritter shot a blast double that a 22-year-old college wrestler would have had trouble defending. Marcus was 135 pounds. He went airborne for half a second before his shoulder, and the side of his head hit the mat with a sound that traveled all the way to where I was standing. One of the other boys, couldn't have been older than 13, flinched visibly. The others kept their heads pointed at the floor. I stood in the doorway. I did not rush forward. I did not raise my voice. I have spent enough time in situations where a wrong move in the first 5 seconds creates irreversible damage to know that you gather information before you act. Ritter was still standing over Marcus, rolling his shoulders, adjusting the drawstring of his pullover. He looked around the room the way a man looks around a room he believes he owns completely. "This is what lack of commitment looks like," Ritter announced to the room. His voice was patient, pedagogical, the voice of a man who has rehearsed this performance many times. You take a bad shot, you pay with it. That is the reality of wrestling. You want to be on this team, you have to learn to handle what this sport gives you. I uncrossed my arms. I took 4 steps forward into the room. The nearest boy saw me first. He was a red-headed kid with tape wrapped around 3 fingers on his left hand, and when he looked up and saw me walking in from the side entrance in military-issued PT gear, with a look on my face that I am told is very difficult to read, he went very still. Ritter turned his head. He clocked me with the practiced sweep of a man accustomed to territorial evaluation. He did the math in about 2 seconds. Woman, late 20s, athletic but not big. Walking into his room unannounced during practice. He filed me into the category labeled "not a threat." "Practice is closed to visitors," Ritter said. His tone was patient but firm, the tone you use with someone you're confident you have authority over. If you're a parent, you can wait in the hallway until 6:30. I did not stop walking. I came to a stop 10 feet from where Marcus was still on the mat, and I looked down at my brother. His right ear was swollen. There was a red abrasion across his cheekbone. He looked up at me with an expression I recognized because I had worn it myself. At a very specific moment in my life, the look of someone who has been so thoroughly conditioned to accept mistreatment that they are no longer sure they are allowed to name it as such. "Danny," he said. His voice was quiet. "You didn't have to come." The inside of my chest did something that I do not have precise military language for. "I know," I told him. "I wanted to." I stood up straight and turned to face Ritter. I did not manufacture any kind of expression. I let my face stay exactly the way it had been, the whole drive here. Flat, steady, technical. "I'm Marcus Reyes's sister," I said. "You need to explain to me what just happened." Ritter expanded slightly. The subtle, postural shift of a man who is choosing to treat an interruption as an opportunity to perform for an audience. Your brother took a bad fall during a live round, Ritter said. This is a contact sport. Physical engagement is part of the curriculum. If your family has concerns about the intensity of the program, I'd encourage you to read the waiver you signed at the beginning of the season. I nodded once, slowly. He's 14, I said. I coach 14-year-olds every day. How much do you weigh? I asked. Ritter blinked. Excuse me? I'm asking how much you weigh, I repeated. Same tone, same pace. The way you ask a question in a debrief when you already know the answer, and you want the other person to hear themselves say it out loud. That is not relevant. You weigh somewhere between 220 and 240, I said. My brother weighs 135 pounds. You just shot a takedown on a 135-pound 14-year-old and drove the side of his head into the mat. And then you used it as a teaching moment for the other boys. I'm trying to understand the educational value. The room was very quiet now. 22 boys standing at the perimeter of the mats, every single one of them watching without appearing to watch. Ritter's tone shifted from pedagogical to something with an edge underneath it. You clearly don't understand how wrestling programs work, he said. If you have concerns about the coaching methodology, there's a proper channel for that. You can schedule a meeting with the athletic director. But walking in here and interrupting a practice session is not. How long have you been pulling Marcus out for extra conditioning after practice? I asked. Ritter stopped. 3 times a week, I continued. Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday mornings. Different schedule from the rest of the team. Always one-on-one. I'd like to know what specific technical deficiencies are being addressed in those sessions, and why the correction protocol requires isolating a student from his peers. The muscle along Ritter's jaw moved. Behind me, I heard Marcus push himself slowly off the mat and climb to his feet. I did not turn around. Not yet. Turning around would tell Ritter something I did not want him to know. You know what your problem is? Ritter said. He had decided to change the temperature in the room. His voice dropped lower, and he stepped forward, putting himself at close range. He was trying to use the size difference to create pressure. You come in here thinking you know what you're looking at because you spent a few years playing soldier somewhere. 18 months in Kandahar, I said, and 4 months embedded with a forward operating unit in the Panjshir Valley. But that's not relevant to this conversation. Something moved behind his eyes. He recalibrated. I don't have to explain my coaching decisions to you, he said. No, I agreed. You don't have to explain them to me. I reached into the small zippered pocket of my athletic shorts and pulled out my phone. I held it up so the screen faced him. You're going to explain them to Principal Hargrove, I said, and to the assistant athletic director, who I called from the parking lot 12 minutes ago, and to the woman who left me a voicemail last night, Mrs. Okafor, who I have already confirmed, is willing to provide a written statement. And if those conversations don't go the way they need to go, you're going to explain your coaching decisions to the Clarksville Police Department's Juvenile Protection Division, because I called them too. And I have a case number. I watched the color leave his face in real time. It went from the florid red of a man who is accustomed to having things go his way to something considerably paler. The shift happened in about 4 seconds. I recorded nothing in this room, I said. I didn't need to. I watched what I watched with my own eyes. He was quiet. Here is what's going to happen, I said. My voice was the same as it had been since I walked through the door. Not louder, not harder. The same. Practice is over for tonight. These boys are going to go home. You are going to go to your office and wait for the athletic director to arrive, because she told me on the phone she was leaving her house as we were speaking. You are not going to speak to my brother, or to any of these boys, or to any of their parents tonight. Are we clear? Ritter looked at me for a long moment. He was the kind of man who had spent 20 years in a small room building a kingdom out of the deference of children and the institutional blindness of administrators who cared more about win records than the sound a 14-year-old's head makes when it hits the mat. He was the kind of man who had never once been held flat against the full weight of his own actions, because no one with the right knowledge and zero fear had ever been standing in the right room at the right time. He looked at the phone in my hand. He looked at the 22 boys watching him from the perimeter. He looked at me. Then he walked toward his office without saying another word. The room exhaled. I turned around. Marcus was standing 2 feet behind me. He was taller than I remembered. I had to adjust upward from the image of him I'd been carrying in my head. He had our mother's eyes and our father's jaw, and standing there in his worn-out practice gear with the red welt forming under his cheekbone, he looked so much like the 7-year-old who had stood at the foot of a hospital bed and didn't cry because he'd decided crying would be too hard on everyone else. I crossed the distance between us and put my hand on the back of his head, careful of the ear. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded. He blinked twice in a way that meant no. "All right," I said. "Go get your bag." He went. The assistant athletic director arrived at 6:43. Her name was Miss Priya Nair, and she came in wearing a blazer she'd clearly put on in a hurry and an expression that told me she had been expecting a call like this for longer than she wanted to admit. I sat across from her in the athletic office for 45 minutes, and I laid out everything I knew in the same precise, sequential way I'd write up an incident report for my commanding officer. Dates, patterns, Mrs. Okafor's voicemail, the extra sessions, the isolation from peers, what I had observed tonight with my own eyes. Ritter sat at the far end of the room and said almost nothing. Miss Nair made 4 calls from her desk, 2 to the school board's compliance office, 1 to a district attorney she apparently had on her contact list, 1 to the guidance counselor who had been assigned to Marcus for the past year and had, she told me with a look of barely contained professional distress, received 3 separate requests from Marcus for schedule changes that would have kept him out of the gym. Marcus had been trying to get out, quietly, the way he did everything, without making a fuss. I sat in that office, and I kept my face neutral, because that is what the situation required. And underneath the neutral surface, there was something moving that I am going to describe as the particular feeling of having been 300 miles away from someone who needed you and not knowing. But I was here now, and I was not going to move. Coach Ritter was placed on administrative leave pending investigation before 8 p.m. that night. He was escorted from the building by the school resource officer. He did not look at me when he left. He looked at the floor. The same floor that 22 boys had looked at for 2 years while something wrong happened and no one with the authority to stop it decided to use it. At 8:22 p.m., Marcus and I walked out of the school building together. The parking lot was mostly empty. The October air was sharp and cold, carrying the smell of dead leaves and rain coming in from the west. The overhead lights in the lot were buzzing, casting everything in that slightly greenish institutional glow that gives every parking lot at night the feeling of a place where things are finally ending. Marcus made it about halfway to the car. Then he stopped. He set his equipment bag down on the asphalt. He stood there with his shoulders slightly forward and his hands loose at his sides. He was looking at a spot somewhere in front of him that wasn't anything in particular. I stopped beside him. I didn't say anything. I've learned from a lot of years in close quarters with people who are processing the irreversible that sometimes the most functional thing you can do for someone is just be physically present and let them take up as much space as they need. Marcus's throat moved. "I thought it was just how it worked," he said. His voice was careful, controlled. The voice of a 14-year-old boy who has been keeping himself very tightly controlled for a very long time. "I thought it was like, this is what training is. This is how coaches are." Nana kept saying how lucky I was to have someone who believed in me. I didn't say anything yet. I didn't want to tell you because you have so much going on, and I knew you'd worry, and I didn't want to be the reason you worried. There it was, the thing underneath the thing. He wasn't afraid to tell me because he thought I wouldn't believe him. He was afraid to tell me because he had already decided that his pain was a burden and that my comfort was more important than his safety. 14 years old and already trained by life to manage everyone else's emotions before his own. I put my arm around his shoulders. He was almost as tall as me now. I had not fully processed that until this moment. "Marcus," I said, "listen to me." He looked at me. "Your job," I said, "is not to manage my worry. Your job is to be 14 and figure out what kind of person you want to be. That is the whole job. Everything else is mine." His chin moved. Once. Then he pressed his lips together hard and looked back at that middle distance spot. "What if it happens again?" he said. "What if it's someone else next time? What if I'm in a situation like that and you're not going to always be able to?" "No," I agreed. "I'm not always going to be there." I kept my arm around his shoulders. "So, here's what we're going to do. We're going to find you a coach, an actual coach, in an actual program who knows the difference between building someone up and taking them apart. And you're going to learn what real training looks like. And the next time someone tries to make you feel like you deserve less than what you deserve, you're going to recognize it immediately." Not because I told you to, because you'll know from the inside what it feels like. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Does it get easier? He asked. Knowing when someone's wrong about you? I thought about that for a few seconds. I thought about the first time a superior officer told me I didn't belong in a forward unit. I thought about the specific feeling of learning through reps, through time, through the accumulation of evidence that the people who need to diminish you are always the ones most terrified of what you actually are. Yeah, I said. It gets easier. We stood in the parking lot for another couple of minutes. A car pulled out from the far corner, and its headlights swept across us briefly, then disappeared. The rain that had been threatening started coming in, light and cold, barely more than a mist. Marcus picked up his equipment bag. He slung it over his shoulder. He stood up straighter than he had inside the building. I'm hungry, he said. I laughed. It came out of me faster than I expected. Yeah, me too. Let's go find Nana Ruth and tell her what happened and get food. She's going to cry, Marcus said. She is absolutely going to cry, I agreed. We walked to the car. The investigation that followed took 11 days. 3 other families came forward once word spread that someone had made an official report. 2 of them had sons who had quietly quit the program in the previous 18 months. One of them had taken their son to urgent care for what the coach told them was a routine practice injury. Ritter's contract was terminated. There was no criminal conviction, something the district attorney apologized to me about with the kind of careful language people use when a system has failed to catch something it should have caught, and everyone knows it. But the coaching license was pulled. The program was restructured. Miss Nair pushed through a new policy requiring adult supervision protocols for any one-on-one training sessions involving minors and any coach. It wasn't everything. It wasn't justice, the way justice looks in the stories that end cleanly. But it was real, and it was documented. And it meant that the next Marcus who walked through that gym door would be walking into something different. Marcus transferred to a program across town run by a woman named Coach Vasquez, who had competed at the national level and had a rule that any technique demonstrated on a student had to be done at 30% force maximum. He called me after his first practice. He was talking faster than he had talked to me in over a year. He said he hit a clean inside trip and nobody yelled at him once. Some people are in your life because of blood and paperwork. Those connections matter. I don't dismiss them. But what I learned from watching Marcus press his palms into that mat and try to find his breath while a man twice his size stood over him and called it education, is that family is the act of showing up. It is the decision to get in the car in the middle of the night and drive 3 hours because someone left a voicemail and something in your chest told you to move. It is the willingness to walk into a room where you are not wanted, in your PT shorts with no credentials anyone in that room respects, and say clearly and without apology, that is my person. And what you are doing to them stops right now. Nobody is going to hand you the authority to do that. You take it. You carry it. You built it out of every hard thing you survived before this moment, and you spend it like it's worth something when the person you love needs you to spend it. My little brother deserved better for a long time before I walked through that gym door. But I was there when it counted. That is enough to start from. It has to be. If you've ever had to fight for someone who didn't know how to fight for themselves, tell me your story in the comments. Hit the like button if this stayed with you. And subscribe, because this community is for the people who show up.